Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our third in a four-part series, Creating an Inclusive Academic Medicine Environment. Today's presentation is Moving the Needle, Mentorship, Sponsorship, and Allyship by Dr. Nancy Spector. I am Dr. Jessica Seaman, Assistant Dean for Faculty Development in Creighton School of Medicine. I have just a few housekeeping items before we introduce Dr. Spector. This session is being recorded for future reference, and you will have access to both the video and the slide presentation. We invite you to submit any questions in the chat to everyone, or you can just send those directly to me, and we'll get to as many as we can by the end of the session. We do ask that you remain muted with video off unless asking a live question, just to assist with the recording. Also, this session is eligible for continuing education, and you will receive the website and activity code at the end of the session. There is a short survey associated with the continuing education, so we do thank you in advance for providing feedback to us as we continue to build robust programming for our health sciences faculty and staff here at Creighton. Now to our speaker introduction. Dr. Renuga Vivekanandan is the Assistant Dean for Strategy and Accreditation in Creighton School of Medicine, and she has made this session possible with Dr. Nancy Spector. And I'll let her have the honor of introducing our speaker at this time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Seaman. What a privilege and honor to introduce Dr. Spector today. Dr. Spector is a professor of pediatrics and serves in dual role at Drexel University College of Medicine and as an executive director for ELAM program, Executive Leadership for Emerging Medicine. It's a part-time year-long program for National Leadership Fellowship program for women in academic medicine, dentistry, public health, pharmacy, and she also serves as a senior vice dean for faculty. And I'm so honored because I'm currently in her program and have learned so much. Dr. Spector is known for her leadership ability, facilitation skills, the contribution to graduate medical education, academic medicine, RN leadership, skills development, professional development, gender equity, mentoring and sponsoring, and curriculum development and implementation. We welcome you and thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Well, thank you so much. What an honor to be here with you. I guess one of the silver linings, I don't know if we like to share that term, but silver linings of the pandemic is that I can be with you. At the same time, I'm in Cincinnati as well. So I'm not at my home base, but really thrilled to be with you and to talk about really, really important concepts that I think have never been more important than now to think about. I do have disclosures in that I received grant funding from several federal agencies. I co-founded and hold equity in the IPASS Patient Safety Institute, which is a company that grew out of a lot of my scholarship in standardizing communication and patient safety. And I have received monetary awards, honoraria, and more recently in the last 2 weeks, travel reimbursement for presentations and work with organizations and institutions to advance gender equity and leadership across the country. So what I thought I'd start with is discussing where we are currently. I know we are all very familiar with a lot of the turmoil that's occurred over the last 2 years, but thinking about how the importance of leadership, strong leadership, and evolving leadership is really important right now in this time of what is not just crisis, but very prolonged crisis. And we're seeing not only our workforce being very fatigued, but our leaders being fatigued. And so the concepts of mentorship and sponsorship to support the forward movement of our work in such difficult times is really very important. And then finally, I will emphasize the concepts around allyship, as they are really critical right now as we continue to fight social injustice. And really, we all need to work together to move the needle. We have been moving at glacier speed pre-pandemic. Before I talk about some of these concepts, I wanted to share a little bit about why I do the work I do and how I got here. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit of my own story to start. So if you look at the picture in the far upper left, that's my family. And when I was a little girl, my parents were both educators in secondary schools. And they were great, dedicated teachers. And they told my brother and I we could do absolutely anything in our careers, except they did not want us to be teachers, which was really saddened me at the time. And they said really because when I was a child, that teachers were not highly regarded, compensated, and they really wanted us to have other opportunities. So I went on to be a doctor. My brother went on to be a lawyer. And then as I journeyed through medicine, I found that I was continually drawn to teaching, to education. And I had several mentors who were really helping me shape my career as a medical educator. I became a medical educator before there were masters of medical education and some of the pathways we have now. And so I needed to help to figure out how am I going to figure out the skills I need. And early in my fellowship, I did a general academic pediatrics fellowship. It was suggested to me by my mentors that I should talk to Dr. Paige Morahan, who was a medical educator in our school, about pathways and resources. And she shared courses I should do, books I should read. And she said something very impactful, which was the thing you really should do beyond doing these courses, et cetera, is to get leadership training at every stage of your career, because you will apply those skills differently along the way. And that will really set you up for success and help you to have influence and make impact. It was very profound. I did what she said. Interestingly, that was the year Dr. Morahan was developing the ELAM program. So I met with her the year ELAM was launched. Along the way, I did have the opportunity to also be an ELAM fellow. So I was an ELAM fellow in 2009-10. And when I went into that leadership training, I realized that what my passion was in medical education was to support the development of faculty in their own strategic career planning, as well as in their own leadership development, so that they could make the biggest impact and have influence in their own careers in medicine and science. And it gives me chills to think about that opportunity as being able to help others, support them in their journey, and to really do the amazing things that all of our graduates of ELAM do, as well as the work of my own faculty and others. And of course, I didn't point out my family along the way, who's been incredibly supportive. Could not have done this journey without them as well. I wanted to tell you just a little bit about ELAM. ELAM is now in its 27th year. Our largest class ever is this year of 71 fellows. We have now over 1,200 graduates who serve in leadership positions in the country in approximately 300 organizations. And despite the challenges of the last year, 12 graduates of our program, we call them ELAMs, became deans or interim deans of our medical schools this year. So that's really amazing. We also have a fellow who is a former fellow who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize this year. And we have another fellow, a former fellow, who just was appointed as a president of a college. So a lot of amazing, positive things despite the turmoil in the background. Our main goal at ELAM is to create equity at every level of leadership in our organizations and institutions. And not only do that, but provide networks and support to help women who attain those positions to really be very, very successful and to drive culture change in our organization. So the work we do is not only to provide skills and visibility for our fellows, but also help change culture, and doing that through a variety of ways. I mentioned we have over 1,200 ELAMs. We just had our selection committee for the next year's class, and we have really been happy to see that the number of applications keeps climbing for ELAM. They went up by 25% this year. And we see that as an indicator that there's incredible interest across the country for women to advance. And we need to support women and figure out other opportunities to help sustain them and help advance them. Well, where are we? Despite all of our work in ELAM, we still have a ways to go. Again, we're moving not fast enough, and we have to think about ways to disrupt the culture and the structure of our organizations to move faster. And we'll talk about some of those strategies in a few minutes. And we all know that over the last several years, our medical school classes, over 50% of entering medical students into medical schools are women, and we're a rising percentage of the workforce. So women are 36% of physicians overall. Having said that, in academia and actually in practice, women do not hold as many leadership positions as we would like. And there's this really interesting phenomenon in medical schools, in the leadership of medical schools, in that at the more entry-level dean's positions or assistant dean's positions, almost 50% of those positions are held by women. And as you ascend to a senior associate dean level, to the vice dean level and dean's level, those numbers really dramatically decrease. And that's partly for a reason which is, I think, a very interesting phenomenon, in that the assistant dean level positions, there are more of them, of course, are often service to our mission dean's positions. So the dean of women, the dean of faculty, which I am, and there's not as much power, resource, allocation ability in those roles. And as you ascend in the decanal hierarchy, those positions have much more ability to do resource allocation, have budget control, et cetera. So when you get to the dean positions, only 19% of our interim and permanent deans in the country are women at this point in time. Very proudly, 75% of those women deans are ELAMs, and as I just stated, 12 were appointed as deans last year alone. And we have not been able to break the 20% number or percentage. And we need to get to a critical mass of over 33% to really make difference in our culture. So we need to do more to advance women to those highest level dean's positions. If we think about the academic medicine structure in general, this is AAMC data from December of 2021, so just a few months ago. If we look at all full professors in the country in medicine, and the first line is medicine, meaning all of medicine, all of our disciplines, still only 28% of full professors are medicine, 22% of the department chairs overall in the country are women, and then 19% of the deans are women. If you break it down by discipline, and we have this data for every discipline, but I just chose internal medicine and pediatrics as examples. 26% of internal medicine full professors are women, and 18% of the chairs. I share pediatrics not only because it's my own field, but we have more women in pediatrics than any other discipline. So 75% of pediatricians are women, and only 39% of our full professors are women. And that number has been increasing over the last couple of years. And only 30% of the chairs are women. And there's an interesting phenomenon that I've been exploring with several of the leaders in the pediatric chairs group, that a lot of women become interim chairs in pediatrics and don't get those permanent positions. So we need to take a thoughtful look about why does that happen. The field that has the second highest percentage of women in it is OBGYN, and their numbers are similar to these, so to pediatrics. So we haven't seen any field really change the landscape in a big way. And I would submit that pediatrics and OBGYN should be leading the way. I've had a lot of opportunity to speak to leaders in those groups in the last 2 weeks. And I think those two organizations or fields should work together, actually, to really think about how to do big culture change. Well, just adding more data. By the way, sometimes when I start talking about these things, it seems very heavy, like very serious and heavy, but I have a lot of optimism to share, and I will turn the conversation to a much more positive, optimistic swing in a moment. This is a a graph from a New England Journal of Medicine paper by Dr. Reshma Jagsi, who is a leading researcher in gender equity. She's an ELAM from 2020, and she published this data with her colleagues. They did a forecast of thinking about the future. If you look at the bottom, those are dates, and then you can see the blue line is department chairs and the orange line are deans. And the forecast is, if we don't do anything differently, we will not meet parity at the dean's level and chairs level until the year 2070. That's almost 50 years from now. That's incredible. I know I will be retired by then. And I'm hoping many of you will be in those high-level positions. And we need to think about ways to disrupt this pathway. One of the calls to action Dr. Jagsi and her colleagues were highlighting is we need to think about term limits as a way to unplug the pipeline. And if we have time in the question and answer period, we can talk more about that. But that's a very controversial thing, to have term limits in department chair roles, in dean's roles, et cetera. Well, how do we compare in academia to the healthcare industry in general? Not that different. So women, as you know, are 65% of the workforce of all of healthcare. And within our hospitals and healthcare systems, only 15% of the CEOs are women, and 29% of the COOs are women. The number's higher there because, as you can imagine, the pathway to COO comes from nursing and medicine. So the numbers are higher there, which is wonderful. And we still have a ways to go. In terms of corporate America, if we compare healthcare to other businesses in the country, women are 57% of the American workforce and only 24% of C-suite positions. And really, very sadly, only 4% of C-suite positions are held by women of color. If you move into the Fortune 500 CEOs, there currently are only 2 Black women running Fortune 500 businesses. And I'm highlighting here board seats. Again, less than a quarter of board seats are held by women. Why is that such an important concept? Because ultimately, decision-making power in resource allocation occurs at the board level. And all of the leaders of our organizations report to boards. And if women aren't there in the conversation, the correct voices aren't always there to make really important decisions. The other thing to know, and this is not anything I knew until about 5 or 10 years ago, is that when you serve on a corporate board, you actually are paid for that. You're compensated for that. And the numbers are high. It could be in the $230,000 range. So if you imagine, if you're a leader of an organization and you serve on 1 or 2 corporate boards, you can make a significant amount of money. And there are not, except for California, and this is being talked about everywhere, there are not clear rules to having diversity on boards or even best practices for how those board seats are chosen. So if you can imagine, the people who are sitting on boards often choose or select their colleagues and friends to be on those board seats. So you don't have a structure to enforce diversity on board seats, and you can make a pretty significant amount of money on those boards. I've mentioned, gender. We've talked a lot in the country over the last 2 years around diversity. That includes race and ethnicity. And I just want to remind us all that diversity is so much more than those pieces: gender, race, and ethnicity. This is a great diversity wheel representation. It's from Johns Hopkins. And if you look at the inner circle, it includes dimensions of diversity that we are typically either born with or just part of who we are and are not easily changed. However, on the external part of the wheel are dimensions of diversity that will change over time, things like education, et cetera. So we need, when we're thinking about our ultimate goal, that our workforce should be a mirror of our patient population, and our leadership should also mirror that, we have to think about all these elements of diversity. And we currently do not track capture or know the amount of diversity that we have currently. And so we have to kind of think creatively and intentionally as we go forward to think about how should we capture diversity and ensure that there are diverse people at every conversation and at the table. Again, the heaviness here, compensation is another factor of where we are in the country right now. And this is a recent study that Dr. Vineet Arora and her colleagues just published in Health Affairs, where they did a simulation where they looked at a physician, a male physician and a female physician coming into entry-level positions. And then if certain elements were not negotiated up front, over the course of a 40-year career, what would be the gap in pay between the man and the woman at the end of that career? And in that simulation, they declared that women on average could earn less, $2 million less than men over the course of their career, which is pretty significant. In my own field of pediatrics, despite 75% of our workforce being women, women still make about 90 cents to the dollar that men do in pediatrics. The disparities cross our professional organizations and our journals that link to our professional organizations. And we know that even today in 2022, there is a disproportionate number of a greater number of men than women on editorial boards. And even in my own field, the 4 highest impact pediatric journals, the editors are white men. So we have to think very carefully about that composition to ensure that the right voices are being considered or heard as decisions are made for who gets published and who serves on those boards. And that extends to who's speaking at plenaries. It's been in the last couple of years that there are what are now called mantle watches, where people on social media are looking very carefully about the composition or people who are serving on panels to ensure that there are diverse voices. And we need to do a very good job at thinking about who we select to ensure we have diverse perspective at our academic meetings. We know when the pandemic is taking a toll on all of us, and in the last year, we have had a significant loss of our workforce and in general in the country. And we know that women are leaving the workforce more quickly than men are. And there's I'm been thinking a lot about the vulnerability of women, and particularly at mid-career. And we are hearing case after case anecdotally, and we're collecting that data now about the number of women who are leaving the workforce, and in particular, women at mid-career. And I would say that what I've been hearing is a disproportionate number of women of color in mid-career in our own field, our own disciplines are leaving. So that's going to be very, very concerning. The pandemic has exacerbated everybody's stress and strains. And for women and for underrepresented men in medicine, there has been a significant, obviously, less time for research, less time for scholarship. There are a lot of concerns, again, about the physical and mental health of our workforce. And we need to do some really important looks at what we can do to change our work systemically so that we can support people. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of institutions moving towards thinking about pausing the tenure clock, et cetera. When I talk to people across the country, they're not so sure that that's what they want to happen. What they want to do is to have support so that they can go on to continue to do their research and scholarship and continue to advance. So it's an and, not just pausing time. We have to take a look also at our organizations around harassment. Unfortunately, there was a report, I think it was pre-pandemic, that surveyed medical students across the country. A huge number of our medical students have suffered from some form of harassment during their medical school clinical time. And that happens disproportionately for women. So we need to think about those psychologically safe work environments to ensure that we all can be supported. We need to look at issues around structural racism and how that impacts every stage of medical education and our pathway in leadership. It's the time really is now to move the needle. And as I've been saying, we've been moving at glacier speed, maybe at a snail's pace. And we are really, I think, poised right now to take some really hard looks at our organizations and make some significant change. We know that diversity has a positive impact on influencing who goes into our fields. There are two studies here that I'm highlighting. One is ophthalmology programs that have more female faculty members have more female residents. So people coming in to look at our programs want to see role models that look like them. Emergency medicine programs with a higher percentage of female residents have a stronger positive correlation with having female chief residents. So if there are more women in the organization, there are more likely to be women in leadership. We know that diversity has a positive impact on patient care. And this is always very profound to me. Patients treated by female physicians had a lower odds of death and readmission. So that makes me really want to think about having a woman as a physician treating myself. And that female physician surgeons had lower odds of death 30 days post-op. And there is a lot also written about how the Harvard, the New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst reported a study where they looked at the amount of time physicians, men and women, spent at the EHR. So I know that's the bane of our existence, but they found that women spent more time documenting in the EHR and were faster to respond to phone calls and to react to abnormal test results. We also know that patients generally fare better when they're cared for by diverse teams. So this speaks to diversity overall, and that professional skills focused studies show that diverse teams are more likely to innovate, communicate better, and there is improved risk assessment by the team. There's also positive financial impact. So there are a lot of reasons why we should be thinking about diversity on our teams. We need to think about major system change, policy around life cycle of the faculty. So it's important to think about engaging people and thinking about diversity at every part of the life cycle of a faculty member. And that means from the time we are thinking pre-recruitment of them, all the way through engaging them in activities and supporting them, all the way through retirement. We need to think about how we can support diversity at every level of governance of our institutions and our organizations. And we need to really be thoughtful. What metrics should we be following? How are we going to track them? And how are we going to be transparent with relaying successes back or not successes in moving the needle forward? There are a couple other things to think about too. In our academic world, there's a concept called the citizenship tax. That is when we all, to sustain the missions of our organizations, we all have to contribute to committee work, to searches, to other things, to really drive things. Unfortunately, for most of our organizations, we don't have great mechanisms to ensure that people get credit for all that work that will count towards their promotion. And so what happens is people who do a lot of that work because they feel it's very satisfying, contributing to the mission work, they spend less time doing clinical work, generating RVUs or their scholarship. And because we need diversity at search committees or on other committees, we need to ask our colleagues who are either women with intersectionality, women or men who are underrepresented, to join to do that mission-based work. And so people with all of those dimensions are likely to have to be taxed over and over again because they're needed for that diversity, and they're spending less time on their scholarship or RVUs. And on the flip side, there's something called the majority subsidy, which is if you're in the majority, you're not going to be asked as frequently to do that work. And you have more time to spend thinking about generating RVUs or doing your scholarship. So as organizations, we have to think carefully, how can we support everybody? How can we give credit for people who are adding diversity to our organizations and doing that mission-based work? The drivers of change, the individual level is really important, and we can all help make change and help influence others. And again, we need to be having all these conversations together, not only women being that voice or women with intersectionality or others who are underrepresented. We need to think more creatively as leaders, and thinking about those structures at the institution and organizational level are really important. And this turns to, thinking about our networks, really important right now. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were all so disconnected, and we had to change the way we were working, and we weren't doing things like attending national meetings, seeing our colleagues and having those conversations outside the office or on the way to clinic, or, in between seeing patients. We need to think about how can we attend to our network, and how can the network, which is very powerful, make change. And I'm really thinking too for women to consider this concept that women underinvest in social capital. That's something, it's very well described in the business world, in our world. And we have to remember that tending to your network is as an important skill as anything else we do, because our networks can help us be able to really make impact and have influence. And our networks include our mentors, our sponsors, allies, and coaches. If you think about our networks for just a moment, there are three components of the network that I want to focus on. Operational networks are the networks we employ every day to get our work done. And they often include those key people in our offices or clinics or on the inpatient services that can get anything done at any moment. They know how to get any lab done expeditiously. They know how to contact somebody to fix something. Those networks are critically important. Our personal network and our strategic network are the networks that sometimes we underinvest in. Our personal network is the network that helps us move forward our own mission-based work. It's finding that passion area, meeting people who also have passion for that. So for me, it's leadership development, gender equity work, finding my colleagues who also have passion for that work. Often those people, we find them outside of our own institution or organization. So we have to think strategically how to meet those people. So for many of it's professional conferences, which I know have changed greatly over the last year or two. As we're opening up the world a bit, it's important for us to think strategically about how to meet others who can sustain that work. It's very energizing. Our strategic networks are the networks that are really focused on where the vision is. Where are we going? What direction is medicine going in? How about your individual field like pediatrics, or your subspecialty work in quality and safety, for instance? So it's really important for us to hear the thought leaders and to think about how our work aligns with that work, and where can we fit in, where can we contribute, how can we help? When we think about the roles of mentor, sponsor, coach, and ally, just to go over a few definitions, mentors are things we are most familiar with in medicine. We've been thinking about these concepts forever. Mentors are really those trusted counselors and guides. Sponsors are those powerful, influential people who provide public support for advancement. Sponsorship is sort of on the continuum of mentorship, but not all senior people think about being sponsors. And sponsorship right now is critically important. Identifying others who have nascent talent or opportunity and how you can help them as a sponsor is so powerful. To be a sponsor, not only do you identify people who could maybe take on a role that they didn't think was possible, but it's helping them be really successful in that new role. Coaches really focus on improving performance, and there's a lot written about and being implemented right now around professional coaches in our organizations, and I'm happy to talk more about that. At ELAM, we have a whole team of professional coaches who help people really think strategically about how to advance in their own career, how to lead the best they can be, also maybe get a new job or take a new career path. And then finally, those allies who are collaborators and help us fight this injustice. Mentoring is so important because of the complexity of our professional roles. We know none of us probably on this call, on this Zoom, not two of us have exactly the same roles. We also likely have multiple bosses, and there has been, for lots of reasons, turnover in leadership, and that's not going to change. It's fascinating that baby boomers who are in leadership positions are starting to retire. So there are many leadership positions open in medicine right now. And with every change of leadership comes uncertainty, and everybody gets worried about what's going to happen next. And we know that change is going to be constant and rapid here on in. And mentoring really provides that stability and grounding and opportunities for professional growth. So we need to continue to think about strategically how to be on a career path right now, despite all that's going on around us, to improve medicine and science in the country and for our own personal satisfaction. For mentorship in general, we have to be strategic about thinking, how can we obtain the best mentors? We have to think very broadly. I never considered peers as mentors when I was early in my career. And over the last 20 years of my career, I would say that many of my peers have been my most powerful mentors. So being very broad and thinking about mentors, making it a priority on your to-do list. We are so busy right now, running from thing to thing. We have to think about how can we make it a priority to open up space and time, not only to think, how can we reach out to gain mentorship relationships, but how can we sustain them and make them a priority, and how to re-engage in thinking about going to meetings, either virtually or in person, to meet people who will really help us in advancing our career and being strategic that way. Mentors are really important and this is from the business world. I think it totally translates into the world of medicine. This is an HBR article. By the way, if you have an interest in leadership, I highly suggest you subscribe to Harvard Business Review. I have no financial benefit there. The articles are short, easy to read. A lot of the concepts that we think about in leadership in medicine come from the business world. So it's very helpful to stay abreast of what the business world is thinking about. This article shared that women are more likely than men actually to have one mentor. They're more likely to have 4 or more mentors, and they're less likely to get promoted. Well, why is that? Again, that's that networking work. They're not always strategic with their social capital, and they're often not in the room at the right time when decisions are made for advancement. That's why for ELAM and for many women I work with, I suggest professional coaching as an option for them to help them think strategically about how to build that network, how to raise their visibility, and how to be strategic in thinking about how they want to advance their career. Professional coaching is a contractual agreement. It is that their money does change hands. And I mention it for people who may be more junior because there are many senior people in organizations now that have professional coaches. And for you to think about, if you're negotiating with somebody over your first job, you may be negotiating with somebody who's not only more experienced because they're your department chair, they also may have a professional coach helping them be strategically, the best negotiator they can be. So being aware of that idea is important. I talked about sponsorship. Having lots of mentors doesn't always get you the next thing, but sponsorship, having strong sponsors are really important. I like this definition. A coach tells you what to do. A mentor will listen to you and speak with you, but a sponsor will talk about you. Again, a sponsor is somebody powerful and influential who uses their power to help you advance. They take an individual within whom he or she sees untapped or unappreciated leadership talent and helps them just catapult. Fewer women than men have sponsors, as I've noted already. And we know, again, from the business world that sponsorship is critical for women of color to access training, development, networking, and advancement. And Black women, women of color, are less likely to be sponsored than white women as well. So we need to think about how we actively are as sponsors, how are we diverse in who we sponsor? We have to be very aware of that. And then allyship, I think has never been more important. There's been so much written about it this year. I think we need to develop a culture of allyship. We need to do all this work together, which means everybody has to be on board and participating in thinking about structural change and how to make a difference. Dr. Monica Lipson, who's a graduate of ELAM, who is now the Vice Dean of Education at Columbia. I like her thinking through this, how she thinks through this. So she thinks of the ABCs of allyship. Inclusion being A, acceptance, B, belonging, and C, community. And then she thinks more carefully about the things that allies need to do. They need to actively affirm belonging for everybody. They need to be very vigilant of what's happening around them and being very inclusive and active. They need to, in the moment, address harm, which then puts allies at risk at some level. We need to be brave and be ready to address harm, advocate for change, stand up and speak out. And allies need to know when to lean in. And there may be some discomfort there. Another thing allies really need to do is need to be active learners. Allies need to be reading about all the issues, current with terminology, current with issues that are happening, and not just rely on others teaching them what needs to happen. And they need to be active in dismantling structural inequity. We know that senior level women, this is from the business world. This is a great, David Smith, by the way, and Brad Johnson do some really great work on allyship. The paper that I'm quoting here is speaking to men, white men in particular, about the necessity of their role as allies. We know that senior level women are more likely than senior level men to practice allyship. Relatively few Black women and Latinas say their strongest allies are white, and few men and women qualify as active allies, those who openly support LGBT colleagues at work. And white women need to be very thoughtful and intentional about thinking about their allyship, just as important as men thinking about being allies as well. Dr. Lipson advocates for allyship at the next level. She says that allies need to be co-conspirators. So here's a quote. If I'm already an ally, why do I need to transition to a co-conspirator? To put it simply, being an ally is lazy, so not active enough. So thinking about these terms, a conspiracy is created when two people intentionally form an agreement and intend to achieve it through some act or preparation. A co-conspirator is one who chooses to take part in the conspiracy and deliberately acknowledges that there is a structural problem. So that active role. Finally, I'm just going to wrap up with what are some strategies leaders should be thinking about right now? Creating a culture of mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship is one thing. We need to pause. Leaders in the last 2 years have been in command and control leadership. We've needed to do that. It's been important. And we need to go back to thinking more proactively about positive strategic things that can really change culture. A couple other things. Women are very vulnerable when they're the only leader in a room who's a woman. we need to have a critical mass of women leaders. If you go back to that number I shared earlier, through 33%, we need to have diverse voices making decisions for everybody. We need to think very carefully about how we can welcome back women who have stepped away from the workforce and who are stepping away right now, how those return programs can be really powerful, and thinking about how can we bring people back in a very inclusive way. And then thinking about encouraging participation of men and women in all the family-friendly benefits. If we're all participating, that changes and minimizes the stigma that women often feel. Again, we need to think about how leaders can support people across the life cycle. In our institutions, we need to build infrastructure to support diversity, inclusion, and we need to resource committees for women, committees for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they can't just be a checkbox. They really need to be actively resourced and substantially resourced. And then we need to think about how to change culture. And this is not going to be easy, but we need to do it. It's never been more imperative than now. And finally, I'm going to leave you with this little girl, Idara, who I met through social media, and her mom is a physician, and I have permission to use this clip, but she will summarize in 1 minute what I just spoke about in 45.
Everyone who's worried and scared, do not fear, because we women are strong. Whatever color we are, whatever shape we are, whoever we are strong women and girls. We will save the world just like the first ones did. And we are very, 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 very worried, but we can make through this, and we'll make through it together.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys. I hope that lifted you up. It did for me. Thanks, Idara.
She's so inspirational. Love it. So thank you for your attention. I will stop sharing my slides so I can see people if there are questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spector. We do have a few questions coming in, but despite your parents' wishes, you have become a great teacher, and we are the benefactor of that. So thank you so much for all the teaching that you've done with us today. Some of the questions have come to me directly, so I will just go ahead and start with our first one. So in speaking about underinvesting in social capital, why do you think women underinvest? Is there a social social underinvesting with lifetime work balance that maybe men aren't? Maybe that's not an issue for men. Do you see that with women?
Yes. And again, I don't want to overgeneralize, because there are many men who are probably here, or your colleagues or partners or others, that are doing as much as women are at home. But we know from recent studies that women physicians tend to still have the majority of the burden of home care, whatever that may be, childcare, elder care, other responsibilities. And even in two physician households, that's the case too. Women tend to spend more time than men, up to 8 hours a week more. So it's a significant number for many. Also, I think there is often, and again, not to overgeneralize, women tend to get their hands in the thing and get it done. Like at the beginning of the pandemic, all the women were taking care of the frontline provider problems and solutions. Not that men weren't, but they were doing it disproportionately. So they're going to go in and take care of whatever has to be taken care of. Another component that worries me is, in academic medicine in particular, there are still sort of old-fashioned ways to network that women aren't always comfortable with. And that could be including going to the bar or a cocktail party. And there are issues that are, linked to the harassment problem So there are many times women don't feel comfortable there. And then there's some like old school things. I mean, even recently within the last year, I've heard about groups of men who are leaders in academic medicine who are playing golf together all day on Saturday. And that's where they're making all the big decisions. And there are no women in that particular two groups that I'm thinking about. So those are all factors as well.
Thank you for speaking to that. Our next question is referring to the 90 cents on the dollar. Are female doctors paid the same as male doctors for services rendered by CPT codes? So is the 10% less income reflecting time away from work for pregnancy, caring for a newborn, caring for children? If they are paid for less for the same CPTs, I would think that would be illegal. If the lower incomes of female doctors reflects time out, then how can we bring parity to the overall earnings?
Right. So this is a great question. By the way, my colleague, Dr. Amy Gottlieb, is by far, I would say, a better expert here. She is part of the ELAM team. Renuga, she may or may not be coming to speak to you soon. She's done a lot of work with the AAMC, so she would have far more knowledge here. To my knowledge, no, it's not a CPT code issue. It has to do with salary. First and foremost, from the get-go, women tend not to negotiate in the same way that men do at the beginning. And it's not just salary, it's all the other things that make you successful. So if you're a physician scientist, it might be how much lab space you have, or just several other factors. I see Dr. Sutton's on the Zoom, and she probably has other things to add. So it's a lot of that in the beginning, and then that grows over time. And if you think about it, if you don't negotiate at every opportunity, and men tend to negotiate at every opportunity, then over time the gap is going to continue to increase. So it's a lot of skill, but also I think it's our responsibility as leaders too to make sure that doesn't happen, and that just because somebody doesn't know they should negotiate and they don't, that we don't help them. Dr. Sutton, do you have an added comment there?
It's interesting you are calling out Dr. Sutton, because we are hearing from her at the summer, but I'm going to let her take it from here and answer some of that.
So I would say that if your organization doesn't have a monitoring plan in place, it is highly likely that you're seeing a drift. As new salaries are negotiated, they're going to tend to be higher. And as Dr. Spector just said, women don't negotiate as often. So I'll tell you, ELAM has pushed me to make sure I'm negotiating for something every quarter. but really, that drift's going to happen. And I'm saying that from an institution that is led and predominantly staffed by, minority women. And that drift still happens unless you have a monitoring plan in place.
Just to echo that, I was part of an organizational look at salary equity about 5 years ago. A woman chair came in, did an analysis. They did a lot of work to ensure parity, and then there was no monitoring system, as Erica's stating. And then over 5 years, same thing happened again. It was fascinating. Same thing, men making way more than women because of that phenomenon.
I think there are a few other questions. Let's see. One of the other questions is how junior faculty find out what are some things they can negotiate. How to junior faculty to find out what are some of the things they can negotiate.
Everything's negotiable.
Exactly. Yes.
When we do negotiation at ELAM, the first time I ever took a course, the instructor at the end of the day made all of us negotiate at dinner. We were all in a hotel. We had to go out to dinner at different restaurants. We all had to negotiate something. I had never even considered that was a thing. And I negotiated a free dessert. So I was very empowered by that. And having said that, there is a lot of room in negotiation. And I think, and if others disagree, chime in or have other ideas, it really helps to have that be a mentored experience. So having a mentor with you, and sometimes you have to call on a mentor who is not in your own institution, because if you're a mentor boss, there's a conflict of interest there for you. You're also trying to keep your budget within your budget and all of those types of things. So asking another person outside of at least the division or department to help you guide your path. But things like office space, so beyond salary, office space, time off, flexibility in your schedule, opportunities. So I always empower women to negotiate for leadership training, for potentially coaching, depending on where they are, other educational opportunities, things like that.
Thank you. Lori Betke is on as well. Would you like to unmute and tell us about the upcoming program when Dr. Spector will be in person?
Oh, you're so kind, Dr. Vivican and Dan. Yes, thank you. I'd love to invite anyone who's on this call to know that Dr. Spector is going to be visiting us in person later this year, August 25th, for a dinner event here in Omaha. She'll also be giving a noon grand rounds style event for faculty and CHI Health and Common Spirit employees locally, and we'll be simulcasting that to our Phoenix campus. And additionally, one of the other amazing he for she allies that Dr. Spector mentioned, Dr. Brad Johnson, is going to be visiting us in May and delivering a half-day workshop on allyship. His voice, his work with Dr. David Smith and their books and academic articles on this is just so valuable. Thank you, Dr. Spector, and we're excited to see you in a couple of months.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm thrilled to be able to go in person. And I completely agree, Dr. Johnson, that will be fabulous.
I have one last question for you, Dr. Spector. I was reading this book, Athena Rising, and it talks about how important for men to mentor females. How do females go about obtaining more mentors that are males? Because I have been beneficial of that. Many male mentors who have sponsored me and given me so much opportunity. How can other junior faculty and mid-career faculty do that?
So I would say it's a great thing we need to think more carefully of after the Me Too movement. A lot of men that I know didn't want to mentor women anymore. They were afraid that they would do something wrong or say something wrong or something. So there was a little bit of a hesitancy developing among a lot of men. I think that's sort of evening out. I think we need, as leaders and senior people, to be talking openly with men and women about the importance of being inclusive in who we mentor, who we sponsor. So that's at the leadership level. We need to be having more open conversations and thinking about, Dr. Johnson, I'm sure we'll have other ideas here. For all of us, I think we need to, again, be strategic of who we ask to mentor us. And sometimes we need other mentors to help us think about how we can engage somebody else. So a job I think a mentor has is to also help connect their mentees to other people who may mentor them. So it may be, asking another person to help you in that process. So anyway, I'll pause there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there any other last questions or comments?
I think what I'll do, Renuga, is I will go through the chat and see what questions we didn't get to since we're at the top of the hour. And if that's okay with you, Dr. Spector, I may send you those questions.
Yes.
And we could get some answers on those few that we didn't get to. And then we can send those out with the slide presentation and the video. Would that work?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. And we do have Lori Badke building on this presentation in May for a May Zoom session. And then we do have, as we said before, Dr. Sutton is going to be visiting Creighton in person in June to also build on this inclusive academic environment. So we're very excited for the sessions that we have coming up. Just keep checking your emails for all of that communication. And Renuga, can you see the blue screen?
Yes.
With the, okay, so that people can, I will go ahead and leave that on for just a couple minutes after. But thank you so much, Dr. Spector. We appreciate your time and your knowledge and your willingness to share it with us.